Welcome to the SEO Insider with your host, Seth Price, founder of Blue Shark, taking you inside the world of legal marketing and all things digital.
Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have you here at the SEO Insider. We have Tim Warren, a co-founder of Helium SEO. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, thanks, Seth. Thanks for having me on.
This is one of the benefits of having a podcast is it's sort of like a dinner party for two. We get to sort of meet people. I've heard a lot about you. Your reputation precedes you, but tell me about your story and how Helium SEO came to be.
Yeah, hopefully the reputation precedes me in a good way, not in a bad way. But no, man, thanks, Seth. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. So I've got a unique background. So I was actually a med student turned SEO professional turned agency owner, if you will. That was my journey, and I started my first SEO company in 2013. It's now 2023, so 10 years in owning SEO companies. I sold my first one, learned a lot of lessons of what not to do when selling an agency and how to actually make money. And then we started Helium from all the lessons we learned about not having tech and link building and then all of that stuff. So
let's talk that. That's
yeah.
You gave it to just for point of reference. I'm the accidental agency owner. I was a lawyer who left law during the first .com bubble in the late 90s in New York. Got addicted during the U.S. law build out, which is sort of a precursor for LegalZoom or FindLaw.
Yeah.
When my law school buddy wanted to open a firm, I didn't. So we divided and conquered. I did the marketing, he did the lawyering. Blew up 30, now 43 lawyers, and about 7, 8, almost 9 years ago,
wow.
We launched. I took my in-house digital, and that's what became Blue Shark. Mostly in the legal vertical now, some medical, and it's been a great run. So I'd love to hear when you started talking about that piece right there. Lessons learned from first agency. What did you learn from your first agency that you didn't want to replicate in your second?
So I was a med student, and I left med school because I wanted to be a surgeon. My goal was to be a surgeon, and I after meeting and spending a lot of time with surgeons, I realized surgeons don't really like their life. They make a lot of money, but they have a pretty crappy lifestyle. And I define lifestyle as time and money. You need time to enjoy the money, and you need money to enjoy the time. If you have time and no money, if you have time and no money, you're a college student. If you have money and no time, you're a surgeon.
Believe me, I get it. I remember graduating law school, and I was with backpackers. So I was no longer a backpacker. I was going back to a corporate law job.
Yeah.
And I took a flight from Bangkok into Cambodia.
Yeah.
And I loved it. It was great. I got toured everything. My buddies who had time took a truck to the border, switched to another truck. I mean, that journey, I always regretted not being. So yes, I get it. And surgeons can't work virtually. They try once in a while and get in the headlines. So it's like you got to be there early doing stuff. It is not a great lifestyle while it is very well paid.
Yeah, exactly. And so as I'm in med school, I'm starting to meet surgeons, and I find out, and I'm talking to doctors, and they're buying urgent care clinics as passive income generators so they can quit being doctors and surgeons. And so I'm like in med school, and I'm realizing, wait a minute, you guys are all trying to become business owners? Yeah, I'm trying to leave medicine to become a business owner. And I had this interest in business, and I'm in med school, and I'm like, maybe I'm doing this all wrong, right? I got this thing backwards. I'm about to spend 9 more years getting every certification on the planet when these guys are trying to become business owners and get out of being certified for everything. So that was this journey of discovery for me. And I was very interested in marketing and sales. Then I read a book called Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And then, classic business book. And in the book, he said, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you got to learn how to sell. So I have this crisis of belief. What do I do? I meet with the dean of the school of medicine. I've worked super hard to get into med school, right? I've worked for 8 years, straight A's, top of my class, 4.0s, all this stuff, right? And then I sit down with the dean, and I'm like, man, I worked really hard to get here, but I don't know that I want to be a surgeon. And I didn't want to be a GP. I had no interest in being a GP, right? That sounded really boring to me. I was like, if it's surgery or nothing. And I remember the advice he gave me, Seth. It was great advice. He said, Tim, I've seen a lot of people come and go through this med school over the years, and it's really hard to get in. He said, but then there's students who get here, and their third year, they're like, I don't think I want to be a doctor. And then they keep going with it because they're so far in, and they get all the way to the end, and they're like, I don't want to be a doctor. He's like, and then you're 350 grand in debt, and you go work at Starbucks. He's like, that's a terrible idea. He's like, if you're not 1,000% sure you want to be a surgeon, don't do this. Like, that's good advice. So I left med school and then got my first job selling cable door to door in Columbus, the middle of winter, commission only. It's the only sales job I could get. I tried to get a pharma or medical device sales job, but I'm not an attractive female and I'm a college athlete, so they didn't hire me for that. And so I couldn't get the job, right? I dressed up best I could, and they said, nope, you're not pretty enough. I'm like, dang it.
Well, not only that, you're pretty enough, but like, it's also a hot mess. Nobody wants to see a guy who just failed at something. I mean, I get it. Like, it's not, sure. You didn't fail. You made a conscious decision, but like when we interview people, when you see somebody take a hard right, it means one of two things. They found their passion or they have no clue where they're going, and good luck to you.
Totally, man. I own a company now. I have salespeople. I have a whole sales team. Like, marketing and sales are so interlinked, right? Because it's the human psychology of how people buy, and marketing is the process of taking people through human psychology to buy. And how I ended up in SEO and SEM, long story short, I went to work for Lamar, and then I worked for Yellow Book, which is gone now. But at the time, they had 6,000 salespeople, and they were looking to move into digital. And so they poached me out of Lamar and said, hey, don't sell billboards, come sell digital. I was like, aren't you guys a Yellow Page company? Like, I don't use Yellow Pages. They're like, no. We're an SEO company. We're trying to be an SEO firm. Okay.
An SEO company without content or links, but an SEO company nonetheless.
Yeah. That doesn't really
let that stand in the way of it.
Yeah. That's a whole other story. And we're not going to deliver what we say. So then they're going to go bankrupt. But that's a whole other story. So I go start there, right? And I'm 24 at the time. I have an iPhone 3. And I was all about digital marketing. I was like, digital is awesome. And so they send me to a 3-week training in Boston. And that was Seth. That was my first exposure to SEO. Didn't know a thing about it before then. But they started talking about SEO and SEM and paid ads. And
was this Donnelly or was this Yellow Book? What was this?
This is Yellow Book. And I was one of 6,000 salespeople. Okay. And they were trying to pivot away from the book, which I had no interest in selling the book. And they were going digital. And so I got that job and I went home and I was like, why wouldn't everybody buy this? This is 2011. Okay. It's 2011. So I'm like, why wouldn't everybody buy this? Like, why would you buy a phone book? You're a lawyer. You're in like 27 pages of full page ads. I don't want to be next to 27 of my full page competitors. Like, screw that. I want to get on Google where I'm the top guy because no one's going to page 2. And so I would literally just walk into a business on my iPhone and be like, hey, what do you guys do? Oh, we're plumbing. And I'd be like, plumbing, Cincinnati. And they're like, they look like, what is that? I'm like, oh, this is my iPhone. Like, yeah. They're like, oh yeah, I've seen those. And they're like, who comes up? And you just show them that they're on page 200, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, we have to do this. What's it cost? And so I started selling SEO and SEM like crazy. But here's what I learned really quickly, Seth, and this kind of leads to the story of today, is Yellow Book. I think they outsourced to Boostability. I think was who they used, but they didn't do it in-house. They had an outsourced provider. And that company, I sold tons and tons and tons of SEO. And then about 7 months later, I started getting calls from clients. Hey, you said I was going to be on page 1 in 6 months. I can't find myself on page 10 yet. Where are we? I don't know how the sausage is made. I'm 24. I'm just selling it. They told me it's going to work. And I'm like, I don't know. I Google them. Yeah, you're right. You're not here. What's going on? So I talked to my manager. He didn't know. So then I can't get an answer. So I pretend to be a client, call my way through the Yellow Book phone tree, finally get to Tony, who's the guy doing my work, right, on these clients. And I'm like, Tony, what's going on with my accounts, man? Like, all these people are pissed. He's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, we're not ranking and whatever. And no lie is what he told me. And this is why I started agencies. He's like, Tim, man, he's like, let me level with you, dude. He's like, I have 50 accounts, 50. I have 50 websites I'm supposed to optimize every month. I'm supposed to write the content, do the like on-page ops, the off-page op, the link building. I got to do their socials. Like, he's like, I have 50 accounts. He's like, I work 40 hours a week. He's like, I don't even log into half my accounts ever. From the time that they start to the time they churn, I never even touch their website. I'm like, but we bill them $2,500 a month? Yeah, every month. You don't even touch them. Never can even log in. And I'm like, we're scamming these people, like legit scam, right?
Well, let me ask you a blunt question. Because in those days, putting a website up you were a little bit later, right? This wasn't 5 years before that. No, but right. It wasn't like that. So there was nominal competition, and it was getting bigger by the month. Totally. What was a widget per month then for Yellow Book when they were selling these guys their bill of goods?
Oh man, SEO was $1,500 to $3,500 a month.
So it's not nothing. There was money that if they had chosen that was always my analogy when I sold against Thomson Reuters and others. Yellow Book would be the same thing, right? The sales rep's got to make money. Your regional manager's got to make money.
Yeah.
The guy who's doing the work, the guy who's supervising the work, and Lord knows there was nobody doing the work, but like in theory, you would need people doing the work. Then you have shareholders. Then you have there's all these different people before you eat, before a single. And when you do it, you take out profit margin, everything else, like how many dollars are left. And that was what always amazed me, because a lot of the sales were probably that $1,000, $1,500 range. And you're like, you weren't paying. It's like the old joke of sending small bills to big companies, like just some percentage would never complain. The other guys churn and they just add more. So
yeah, no, that's it, man. And so like, it's one thing if they're charging them like GoDaddy, like $100 a month for SEO or something, right? And you're like, I don't really know what I'm getting.
But that's also the lie. It's not it's tough. And we'll talk about this in a minute. I want to get your thoughts on it. So basically, you realized it was the Emperor's New Clothes. You got to get out. And that was when you started your first company?
100%. That's literally. And so my first company was called SEO Exposed, because I went through this thing at Yellow Book and I was like, okay, not this. Like, we can't do this, man. Like, this is not the reputation I want to have in this industry. Holy crap. And so it was literally my wife and I, my wife, who got married in Cincinnati. She was the director of marketing for her dad's software company. And she actually knew what SEO looked like and link building and how to do SEO and what the whole process was. And so we looked at this thing and we're like, man, these businesses are getting taken advantage of because they just don't understand SEO. They don't know what they're buying. And so these people are coming in and they're selling them stuff, and then they don't know how to keep them accountable because they don't know what an H1 tag is, from a meta description, from a link. They have no idea. So yeah, that was what led us to start SEO Exposed. That was in 2013. And then we started that company, built it up and sold it in 2016.
How advanced were you when you sold that one? What were you guys doing in revenue?
We're about probably 3 million in revenue, 20 employees.
Nice.
So we
and why get out?
2 reasons. The first reason was, this was my first real company. I tried some other stuff, started them, didn't work, right? Entrepreneur, but I didn't understand culture. So we just started hiring people and it was like, cool, you do ads, great, you're hired. You do SEO, great, you're hired. And then 3 years in, I realized, like, who are all these people? Like, I'm not even friends with these people. Like, this is not a culture of people that I connect with. I'm not friends with any of these people, but we do the work together.
Gotcha.
I realized, I'm like, all right, I didn't know anything about building culture. I didn't know the value of culture. And I was like, I'm going to have to restart here if I want to really do culture right. And I don't want to restart. That sounds like a huge pain in the butt. I'll sell it. The second reason was because after 3-4 years of doing, white hat SEO for brands, I realized, right, if you don't have proprietary technology, you have nothing that's truly differentiated. You have a service team and you have SEMrush and Screaming Frog and Ahrefs like everybody else. So if you don't have something different, how are you going to win, right? Military battles are won by better technology and better strategy. SEO battles are won the same way. And so for me, I realized I need a tech founder as part of my process. We need to be a tech-driven company that does things differently. That's how we're going to win. And so that was the other reason I sold it, because I wanted to start over and build something from the ground up that was very AI-driven and very technology-first driven, which is how we ended up at Helium, building Helium.
And then talk to me about that. What was the, look, get culture. Like we've been through this. We spun out of the law firm. It was just a hodgepodge. My top deputy, who's now president, started as an intern at the law firm, is sort of like, and the fact, it sounds crazy, and not that I probably couldn't figure it out, but as an entrepreneur, they call him the EOS world visionary, I did not relate well, particularly to what was millennials, now Gen Zers coming in. You look a couple of years younger than me, but when I go in, no matter how hip I may think I am, my kids say I'm cringe, but when I'm talking to a 23, 24-year-old, it's like their father talking to them. It doesn't matter what I say.
Yeah.
And that by creating layers of managers and managers that relate, and having people that are all in on culture, where that's the number one driving force, huge differentiator, I think, between us and other companies. And it wasn't like, it's not a straight line. Learned a lot of lessons early on, even when you wanted to have culture, right? Partially because Helium SEO is not what it was when you started. It was harder to hire when you started. Despite wanting culture, you could only do so much. Once we had a brand and could say no to people, that became, but when you start and you just look, you had that 1.0, so maybe you would use that as your first But I remember early days of our company, three guys in the links room were passing Adderall around. And, we had one guy who came in to do something who was like day trading in full view of everybody while multitasking his job. Like we've
Right.
come a long way. That was, maybe I'll just look at that as my 1.0 like you. And then we're like, okay, we really need to hire differently. So what was it, understanding culture, and that they don't teach you that, at least when I was in school, that was not taught as a definitive factor. I'm sure it is now. What were the technology differentiators that you brought to bear to mix with culture and systems that that sort of differentiate you guys from the rest of the world?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll start on the culture piece, because that part's really important. And then I'll talk about technology, because we have strong feelings on both. First, on culture. So one of the roles of the CEO should be the chief culture officer, right? Until you're big enough to have a chief culture officer. And my CEO coach that I used for a long time, and Cameron Herold, he coached, he was at 100, got jumped from like 2 to 106 million. He coached CEO of Sprint.
Well, friend of the show. He,
Cameron.
Our COO is in the COO Alliance. We're big fans of Cameron.
There you go. So Cameron and I are very close. He was my CEO coach for a long time at Helium. And as we've kind of grown, and now we've gotten to a certain size, like we're off and running. And so he told me, he said, great companies are a little bit less than a religion, but more than a business, right? That's how he defines culture. And I was like, man, that's really cool. And if you look at like Zappos, right? Zappos was like that. It was less than a religion, but more than a business.
That might have been close. That might have been pretty close to a religion, but yeah.
They were closer to a religion, but still, right? It's like not a full religion where there's like a whole religious text and whatever, but it's like close, right? Where people really feel strongly about the culture
brand
and the brand and how it's done and how it's supposed to be done. So it's more than a business, but less than a religion. I thought that was a great analogy. And then here's the second thing that we also thought about, which is the founders of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They had this like elevator or airport test they talked about. They said one day Google's going to be huge. They had vision, and they said Google's going to be so big we're not going to know all the people who work there. And one day we're going to be at the airport. We're going to be going somewhere, and we're going to meet someone who comes up to us like, I work at your company. And they said their culture test was they wanted to make sure they hired so well that when that person walked up to them in 20 years and was like, I work at your company, they didn't talk to them for 5 minutes and be like, oh my gosh, I'm sad that you work at my company. They wanted to hire people that were interesting and smart and innovative, and they wanted to create this culture that people couldn't get into Google, who they would ever meet in the airport and be like, hate that you work at Google, right? And so I was like, wow.
Which I now get, because I'm now enough removed. When I meet people, it's really, really cool.
Yeah.
When you, and that like, and are we 100% there? No, there are a few people that probably don't fit as well into the culture, but are hard workers, and we're not at Google level, but right. It's, I would argue it's 85-90%, which is, when you do it, and that when there's a buzz about it, that to me is again, it's the idea of when you see these people, you're like, oh, I'm so thankful, or I can't believe this person works. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I was given that background of like how to think about culture, because I think it really matters. It's not just like culture is not a ping pong table and benefits. Okay. Those are employee benefits. Culture is something different. And here's how I would define culture is you should be able to sum up your culture in like 2 or 3 words, right? And those 2 or 3 words should really describe how you view the world. And to have a great culture, you need to hire people that fit your view of the world. And so I'll give you an example. When we started Helium, we said, look, we want to hire people that are really fun, because we don't like working with boring people. And we really care about humor, and we want to tell jokes, and we want to make it a fun environment. We don't want to make it an environment where people can't ever tell jokes and they can't take themselves lightly, and it's like all uptight. Like, we hate that. It's never going to be our culture here. And so, as we started to build out what we wanted culture to be, we were like, we want it to be fun. We want it to be lighthearted. And then at the same time, we want to, we're a tech company. We need to hire really smart people, because things in digital move fast, and if people don't learn quickly, they won't make it here. And so we also need people with large horsepower in terms of their ability to learn quickly. And so we quickly, as thinking through this, we shaped all those things. And then we came up with one last piece that really mattered to us, which is we said, we realized, we thought about the people we've worked with that we really enjoyed working with the most. And who are the people that are the best to work with and who are the people that aren't the best to work with? And what we landed on was people that are highly dedicated to personal growth, to self-development on their own. They typically tended to be the most interesting, engaging people to spend time with, because they were trying new things and they were pushing themselves and they were learning new things all the time. It wasn't, hey, Seth, how's it going? Oh, the weather and, whatever, and politics. And they were only complaining. It was like, oh, I'm learning this new language. Oh, I'm teaching myself how to code. Oh, I'm doing something like, wow, sweet. They're interesting people. And so then we started to boil down our culture to 4 things, right? Fun, lighthearted, highly intelligent, people dedicated to personal growth. And that was our culture, and that was who we hired. And so, there's all different ethnicities and religions and backgrounds and whatever. We didn't care about that. We cared about those pieces. And that was how we've always focused. And I think that's what's led to the culture we have at Helium, which is strong, because when you focus on those things that we have in common, that's what we focus on. We don't focus on the things we don't have in common.
That's awesome. Now, are you guys remote, in-house, hybrid?
We're hybrid. So we have a corporate office in Cincinnati where we have about 30, 35 employees out of that. And then we have remote people all across the country and now all across the globe. So we're about 50-50. I guess we have a little more and we're probably 50 employees. So we're a few more people in office, and then
that's the next challenge, right? I've had on my other podcast, the founder of 15Five, it's one thing to have culture under a roof, and we were under one roof pre-COVID. Post-COVID, we're in a clubhouse with once a week meetings. People maybe show up twice a week. We have twice a year people, all hands on deck. And partly it was demanded. We're in a little blue bubble in the DC metro, so that COVID was COVID. It wasn't like my friends in Florida where there was no COVID. So, that to me could be a whole nother show, talking about, like, as you pivoted out of, the home bubble, making sure those people, are part of it. And I think it's just been one more fun challenge. Although I think the truism that we've seen, and I'm sure that you would, I would assume you would have seen as well, is our A players or A pluses working remotely, and our B minus players became C plus players working remotely. It was sort of an exaggeration of everything.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. I'll give you my exact thoughts on all this. Some people make really, really good remote employees, and those same people may make worse office employees, and vice versa. It depends on the person. I think there is A player, B player, C player as well. And if you take a B player and take them remote and they get C player, whatever. But like our recruiter's in Florida, and she's awesome. She's hyper responsive, always on camera, always on video, always on, like, she's remote, but she doesn't feel remote because she's so engaged. And anytime there's a chance to come to corporate, she flies up, she's there. So, like, she's remote, but she doesn't feel remote. And then we have other people who are even less remote. They might live one state over and they feel like they're completely remote, right? It's like camera off. They barely engage or whatever. So I think here's my thoughts on that, Seth. With Helium, we have remote and we have in office. And one of the things I'm learning is that as a company, we have to realize that we have 2 different experiences. We have the experience of, I work at Helium and I'm in office, and that's a different experience than I work at Helium and I'm only remote. That's 2 different experiences. And I don't have empathy for that because I live in Cincinnati and I work at corporate. And so I don't actually know what it's like to be remote at my own company. So that's something that we're realizing. The second thing
by the way, you just had a light bulb moment. There should be a chief remote officer, or at least a manager, senior manager level, somebody, like, again, you always have a chief people officer that's doing stuff, but is there a person that's solely focused on that constituency, just like you would have in a, any sort of organization where you have a minority or a different class? Like, how is that class being treated?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And because what we have realized as we've gone through some stuff at Helium is, if you go through a challenging time, right? Let's say you lose a major client and it was challenging or whatever, right? Or the economy's rough, and you show up at corporate and you see the executive team, the leadership team, you see the owners, you see other people, dogs are coming in and out, you're like, okay, we're okay, right? If you go through that same thing and your experience with Helium is a computer screen in your guest bedroom, right? It's a whole different animal. that's your whole experience is the Zoom screen. And I think the challenge of that is it's so much easier to quit a Zoom screen than it is to quit friends and deep connections you've made in person. And so, for us, I think the difficulty, Seth, for us is realizing like remote work is here to stay. Okay. Like remote work's not going away. At the same time, even for our remote teams, we're realizing we need to bring our remote people in office more often.
How often do you have the whole team in?
Right now we do it once a year. We bring the whole team in once a year, but I think we want to try to move it to quarterly, have the whole remote team in all at the same time on the same week, once a quarter. And it's less about keeping track of people because look, you and I both know this, right? Like if you want to go to an office and waste time, you can stand around and talk to people at the water cooler, waste time. It's not about that. It's about people building relationships and people knowing each other and truly being friends and helping each other.
No, couldn't agree more, right? So we work twice a year, everybody at the same time. And then the question is, do people come in on, what I'm working with is because when you bring everybody in at once, it takes on a different life.
Yeah.
It's not, versus I would love to have twice a year where it's all hands on deck for learning and twice a year where you're with your teams just to get those extra touch points, maybe not all at the same time, because it takes on a different thing if every single body is there. The thing that we have noticed, I'm curious, because we've gone so extreme in the other direction, we knew that in our market, we couldn't get people back full time. That was not happening. We knew that if we didn't have some sort of an office, we would lose people the other way.
Yeah.
But the funny thing that we've seen, with exceptions, that many of the people that love to come to the office when they have the option of doing otherwise are the least productive people. And the days in the office are the least productive, which is just, again, it goes like we've almost like gone full circle where we've weeded out, and the people that are sort of needing that, it's the good news was we lost a lot of office drama. Like weird sort of interpersonal nonsense disappeared, but we also had like this segregation where the people that were sort of like needed that as a drug, not just as a collaboration or we do weekly events and we do things like that, but the idea that I had to be there, those people were the least productive by comparison. It was just an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, here's at the end of the day, man, what I think it boils down to, Seth. I think as a company, you have to decide like who you guys want to be. You have to decide, look, are we remote or are we in person or are we hybrid? Because all three are very legitimate. Helium's decided we're hybrid. And the reason is because we don't want to be fully always remote, like a TopTal or whatever. That's fine. There are companies who can do that. That's just not what I personally like and what our management team likes. Like we like there to be some person-to-person time, right? But also, I don't need to sit with you 5 days a week to have a good relationship and have a working relationship. Like we can work from home a couple days a week. So what we do at Helium is Monday, Wednesday, Friday in office, Tuesday, Thursday remote. And then if you live in a city where we don't have an office, you can be fully remote. And then what we're learning is to do a better job on the front end of asking questions of like for people who would be remote. Have you worked in a full-time remote capacity? Do you like working full-time remote? Do you want to be in an office? Why do you want to be remote? What are the benefits, right? Because if you live in downtown New York and commute is an hour and a half each way every day, dude, right. Remote's so much better, right? Because that's 3 hours of wasted time every day. Like that just makes
even if it's 45 minutes.
Yeah. But like in Cincinnati, for example, like our offices are in northern Cincinnati. The average person's drive is 20 minutes to the office. It's not that bad, right?
Exactly.
So it's like not a big deal. And so I think you have to have empathy for your team, and like there shouldn't be this like blanket statements across the board. I think it should be empathy. I think you should look at it market by market. I also think you should look at it with individual leaders, because there are some leaders who are better remote and they can build good remote teams. But where we have seen it break down is if like an entire team is in office and the leader's remote, that has not worked well.
Okay.
Or the other way around.
Interesting.
And so my encouragement to like people listening and kind of what Helium has figured out is you got to be true to your core convictions. So if you have a leader whose core conviction is in office is better, that person is going to really struggle with remote because they don't believe in it. And then they're not going to embrace it, and they're not going to make the remote experience good for those remote employees.
I know, but it gets exponentially more complicated, because let's say, okay, you have your pod,
yeah,
guys there, does that mean that you really need to hire from within to create your leadership bench? Because if you don't, then you're sort of like, you may one day have a person in-house, the next day it's out, and then you're saying and look, that's another light bulb moment, Laura. I'm like, yep, that's right. Versus, and to me, that has been, you want to give opportunity to advance.
Yeah.
Which means that sometimes that person's remote, sometimes they're not when you're in hybrid, which then would limit the opportunities for the hybrid people if that person has to be, or you're saying the whole team could be remote, which is, a whole nother, and that's, I think, partly why we went to the clubhouse, is that we wanted less of a distinction. Because I think to your point, if everybody is used to working remote, like I'm not the opposite of you, but if the primary is remote, where the office is a plus, it's less of a differentiator negatively to the people that are fully remote on the other side of the country.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I'll give you a couple examples, right? And by the way, this is our own personal take on it. There's other companies doing it.
And exactly, it works until it doesn't work, right?
Yeah, that's right. So take sales at Helium, right? So we have a VP of sales and we have a whole sales team. We have had remote salespeople. We have had some be successful, some not. We've had a whole in-house sales team. And when our VP started about a year and a half, 2 years ago, he came in and he said, I'm only going to build an in-office team. I'm not interested in having a remote sales team. And I said, why? Because I was like, we've had remote salespeople and it's been fine. He said, because that's the culture I know and I like, and that's what I want to build. And I was like, okay, that's your call. You're the VP. And so he's always gone all in and embraced that. And I will say he's done a really good job because he's been able to lean into that. Like, he knows what he wants, right?
But then God forbid he's not there, then you're left with the team that the next guy is like, why have we settled for local? I mean,
yeah,
no disrespect to your, and again, right. I struggle with it because I'll give you one last piece, which I mean, we'll end on culture. We'll have to come back for part 2 to talk more. But let me ask you this: one of the struggles that I've had, and maybe it's just us, is that I look at culture, and it sounds awful, but there's culture for a business. The sales team in most businesses is almost an entity unto itself very often, and never the two should meet, because you want all those attributes, and those are amazing attributes. Not all of your salespeople, if you find somebody who sells, other attributes very often go out the window. In the perfect world, you get everything, but you're lucky enough you find somebody who can sell. That's not nothing. What are your thoughts on not differentiation, but the balance of when you're dealing with, I get for rest of an organization, but for a sales team itself, especially since they're going to be in-house for you, is that at all a challenge? Because culture means different things with sales and non-sales.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Helium's a pretty unique agency in that we invest very heavily in sales tech stack. We use SalesLoft and Salesforce, and we have a sales team. We have the head of sales. We do cold emailing campaigns really aggressively and effectively. And like we're pretty sophisticated when it comes to sales. And that's my background, right? I was a sales guy, then a sales leader. And then when I started a company, it's like, well, we're going to invest in sales because I know and believe in sales. And then of course we do our own marketing as well. So we kind of get the best of both worlds, which is part of why we've doubled 4 out of the last 5 straight years, is because we're good at sales. Let me talk about that. That's a nuanced conversation. I have a lot of thoughts on this. Number one, it's important to know who you are and who you want to be when you grow up. And so as a company, we've been really clear with the team, like, we're a sales-driven organization, and that's what we believe in. And we've had some employees who've come and said, I don't like that. And we've said, then this is probably not the place for you, right? They don't, and there was a time when we had, I'll give you one example, right? Where like stuff came to a head. One of our top sales guys, and there was a project manager, and there's an account, who the account was being very needy. They were asking for extra stuff. I think it was stuff that wasn't in the SOW. And I trained a lot of our sales team initially myself, and then, passed on to a VP of sales who trained. And I trained these guys. I said, look, service is all that matters. Serve people and money will follow. Take care of the relationship, take care of people. Just make sure people feel loved and cared for. It's okay if we go above and beyond and we deliver extra. It's okay. Right. So that was the mentality. And they're like, let's do what it takes to make the client happy. And so when the client called and they said, we need these things, my sales guy said, we're gonna service this account. We're gonna manage the relationship. We're gonna make it happen. We'll figure it out. Let's do this work, which I think is the right call. And then the project manager came in and they said, no, they're stepping all over us. We're doing all the stuff outside. We shouldn't do this. This is the wrong fit. And so then this whole fight breaks out, and this mediation comes up to us as a leadership team of like, mediate this. We basically came back and we said, look, the salesperson is right. We need to do what the client asks. We need to service the client. And the product manager, got pretty frustrated and said, you always take sales aside, and she quit over it. Okay. She left. And she basically, her feedback to us was, well, you need to fire that top sales guy for me to stay. Right. And this guy's bringing in millions a year in revenue. And so here's the challenging thing in that, right? There are cultural misalignments sometimes between that sales-driven personality where it's a hard charging, I'm gonna go get it. Sometimes, they're like very outgoing people, and they're drivers, right? They're pushing business. And then there's other personality types in the business that aren't gonna be like that, right? The product managers are not gonna do that, engineers. And so what we've had to try to do, Seth, internally is work with people to have empathy, to tell our salespeople, hey, you're a different breed. These guys are not the same breed as you. Like, you'll pick up phone and make cold calls. That would terrify some of these people. But then they're frustrated that you make so much more money than they do. And so when we need to sit them in a room and say, guys, yes, salespeople make 6 figures and a lot of money. They make a lot of money. But are you willing to do the job they do? Are you willing to make 100 cold calls today? No. Are you willing to go face rejection? No. Would you like a quota? That guy's quota is $1 million. If he doesn't sell $1 million, he gets fired. They're like, oh my gosh, I absolutely don't want that. But then that's what comes with that high pay.
No, understood. But it's one of those things where we made a conscious decision, or I couldn't find the people locally, so that our sales team is not there, which allows for some insulation and protection of the core culture.
Sure.
Because if you, as you just said, you have a top salesperson, and again, I'm sided with your salesperson here. If anything, it's our non-sales team that bends over backwards for people. It's our sales team that says, hey, we got to charge more for this. So like, it's funny, I have the opposite dilemma, but that I find that and again, this maybe we'll have to have you back to go further and deeper into this, but the integration of sales into traditional culture that got you where you are is not nothing. It is something that I don't want to say I've struggled with. I just haven't succeeded. I have amazing company culture, and not that we don't have great salespeople. And but it's almost like ships in the night. If it does hit, great. But as you said, you're not firing you're not going to, get rid of your top salesperson because it's not a perfect cultural alignment with the rest of the company. I'm sad that, somebody went there. My guess is there was more going on than just that. Like there always is, but that. I love the fact, in one sense, half empty, half full, that you have employees that understand your bottom line, and that if they go beyond it, the profitability of the company, not that you as the leadership may say, you know what, we do want to do more. It is always amazing how things take a life of their own. But in one sense, that person is looking out for your best interest in one respect, because if everybody did that, your margins would shrink and you would not be happy.
Yeah, I think so. So how did we get it where we have an in-house team that works with the agency without separating them? How we did it, Seth, is it, just like anything with clients, there's an education component to it where we've had to take time to educate. And so what we'll try to do at company-wide staff meetings is we'll try to address these issues and say, guys, why do salespeople make so much more? Well, they have quotas, and it's a performance-driven sport. And if they miss quota, they get fired. None of you want that job. No,
but it's more than that. I think it's the mentality. You're talking about, you want to have people you want to hang out with. Sometimes that comports, sometimes it doesn't. And that, so, everybody's got their issues. Tim, this is fascinating. You are a fascinating guy, and I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope that our paths cross sooner than later. And if they don't, we will do a part 2 to dive deeper into this, because this is, you have done some just amazing things, and, can't wait to continue this conversation.
Sounds great. Seth, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Tim. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the SEO Insider with Seth Price. Be sure to check back next week for fresh insights into building your brand's online presence. Episodes are available to stream directly on Blue Shark Digital's website.